for inviting me.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for having me and thinking of me during this training. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to COVID Connect. We'll talk a little bit about COVID and how do we slowly transition back to being in person. As folks are entering, just something that I've put in the chat and I've asked folks to do is to share what is bringing you joy. What is bringing you joy? It doesn't have to be from today. It can just be what in general. And I see a lot of family, vacation, flowers blooming. Jill has a lot. So Jill, I love it. The weather. So put that in the chat. I love interacting with folks. We're going to do a lot of chat interaction and also share out. So just okay, the cheesecake, where did you get that from? Yes. So please do so. Just a little bit about who I am. I work at the Health Network. I'm the coordinator of well-being. I've been at CSU now, I think I'm finishing out my 6th year. I used to work in university housing as the coordinator for diversity inclusion, supervising the inclusive community assistant program. So I've worked a little bit with the LSCs, particularly our SDPS partners. So I've been around at CSU for quite a bit. And so happy to see some of you all again and meet some new folks. So welcome. So our intentions for today is that you're going to gain some tips from this presentation, and they're for yourself, but also to help others. I know a lot of you all are supervisors, and so hopefully the tools you'll take today, you'll be able to share with your supervisees should you need to. I also want to acknowledge that we are all showing up in this place today with multiple stressors. We are showing up as we are, and I want to validate that because we all are experiencing different life circumstances. We also carry different social identities. So how I show up, for instance, as a woman of color is going to be super different than how, say, Emily shows up, right? And that is our own story and own journey. And I want to acknowledge that we're going to take from this presentation differently. So just keeping that in mind. And I want to remind people that pandemic, whether you feel like we're coming out of it, we're still in it, whatever, it's around us. So things that we would normally experience on its own can be stressful or hard or whatever, and then you throw it in the pandemic mixing bowl, and it's just right, it's just a whole nother different category. So really want to just name that it's still happening, right? We're via Zoom instead of being in person, and that's definitely going to shape a lot of what we talk about today. So we're going to talk about COVID Connect. And just to kind of help you remember the tools and some steps that we're sharing with you today, I've created an acronym. So COVID stands for call it what it is, or feel your feelings, my favorite. Observe your habits, vacate, press pause, identify your self-care needs, do it in alignment with your values, and then lastly, connecting to others and resources. And we're going to go in depth with each one in this hour. But before we go on, the transition is coming and prepare yourself. I don't know about you all, but in our office, we've been told August 2nd, right, is the day to come back. And we were told this, I think, close to the end of May, maybe beginning June. And I'm very thankful for that long warning because I'm still not there yet of we're going back. And others have been waiting to come back, and others are like, I would rather do anything else. So we're all in different stages of like how we are going to see this, fall semester, and transitions are tough and they're crappy. And even though some of us have gone through many transitions, maybe many different jobs, it still sucks no matter what position you are, no matter how many times, it's just really difficult. So we're going to talk about transition and the difference between transition and change and what to expect from that. So firstly, what is the difference between change and transition? So change is something in this definition is like an external event or situation that takes place. It can happen really quickly. So it could be a new business strategy, let's say, a turn of leadership, a merger, etc. And then the organization focuses on the desired outcome that the change will produce, which is generally in response to external events, right? That's change. Transition, however, is the inner psychological process that people go through as they internalize and come to terms with the new situation that change brings about. So empathetic leaders recognize that change can put people in crisis. And you might be thinking like, well, I'm not really feeling like I'm in crisis, right? Crisis is a wide, I think there's a lot of definition for crisis, right? I think crisis with capital C, little c, but the starting point for dealing with transition is not the outcome, but the endings that people have in leaving the old situation behind. So want to say that again. The starting point for dealing with transition is not the outcome, but the endings that people have in leaving the old situation behind. And so for many folks, I'll use myself as an example, working from home provided a different routine for me. I think it provided some new reflection in how much I was working, how much time I was giving to myself, rest I needed. It gave me time with at the time my pugs, right? I know some people have developed closer relationships with people in their household, maybe spending more time with their dependents, what have you, right? And so I really want to emphasize that transition is the closing of that, the ending of that, in order to then start on this new change. And that's tough. For some people, they're ready. And again, for others, it's going to be really hard to leave. I mean, let's be real. Like, I don't know how many of us have worn, like, I'll take myself for example, like worn pants, like real pants, right? I've worn leggings, a little bit more comfort than I would going to the office. And that's going to be a change to be like, oh, I guess I can't wear my, workout pants underneath. So that's just a small example. So really what's important is that we support people through transition. And so rather than pushing forward is essential if the change is to work as planned. So if we want people to successfully come back in person and kind of, I guess like get back into what was the routine, we need to support people through that transition rather than trying to force them through it. And so change will only be successful if you all as supervisors and leaders address the transition that people are going to experience. And this is key really to capitalize on opportunities for innovation and creating organizational resilience. We often, I know it with that, I think without malintent, we tell people like, oh yeah, you'll get over it, or like, it'll, this will pass, right? This too shall pass, or trust the process. And those things are very helpful, but we also have to recognize these things take time. And it may take 6 months to 9 months before we feel like, okay, I'm back in the groove that I was before we went into working remotely. But we've been working remotely for 14 months. I attended my first in-person meeting yesterday and I was like, this feels so odd, just to see you all in person in 3D, not via, my Zoom meeting group. Here's a visual of kind of like transition. So what are the stages of transition? So there's endings. So transition starts with an ending, right? Like I said, an ending of an older situation. So the first phase of transition begins when people identify what they're losing and learn how to manage these losses. They determine what is over and being left behind and what they will keep. And these may include relationships, processes, right, locations, etc. So I'm leaving behind being able to work outside on my patio, being able to, in between meetings, taking care of things around the house that I needed to do, but I didn't have time when I was working in person, right? Those are some things. Then we move into the neutral zone. And the neutral zone is the second step of transition, which comes after letting go. People go through an in-between time when the old is gone, but the new isn't fully operational. I envision this to be when we're actually in person, and maybe that first, I would say month, right? We're back in person, but we haven't quite embraced or really got into the swing of things. So it's really when the repattering takes place. And this is the core of the transition process. This is the time between where old reality and sense of identity and the new one, right, kind of start to come together. And people are creating new processes and learning what their new roles will be. And there's a feeling of feelings are in flux, and there's confusion and distress. but this is the seedbed for new beginnings. And this is where folks, right, especially I think folks like you all in leaders of in positions of leadership, having influence over your supervisees really can kind of, frame your staff meetings or one-on-one check-ins to really focus on this transition. And then the last phase, I would say, would be new beginnings. So this involves now new understandings, values, and attitudes. And it's marked by a new release of energy and a new direction. So it's an expression of a fresh identity, right? Of being back in person, but kind of maybe a rebranding, right? Of like, well, what I did before is going to be different than what I do now. Well-managed transitions allow people to establish new roles with an understanding of their purpose, the part they play, and how to contribute and participate most effectively. And so folks feel reoriented and renewed. So just wanted to provide some of that context of like what's the difference between change and transition and how those two interplay. And then we'll go into how COVID Connect can kind of help with some of that, with the ease of transition process. So the first letter for COVID is C, which is call it what it is and feeling your feelings. And I wasn't joking when I said this is my favorite. It's also the hardest, I think, for folks. I'm a big, and Emily will like agree, but like I'm a big F in the Myers-Briggs. In true colors, I'm bright blue. In strengths, all of my top 5 are relationship building. So I'm a big feeler. Like empathy is my number one. And so feeling your feelings, it can be easy for some, like me, and it can be difficult for others, but it's important to do that. We've all experienced and still are a variety of difficult emotions. And it's okay to be in your feelings, but there is something tough about being stuck in your feelings, right? And so we want to have a balance of not being stuck in your feelings, feeling your feelings, not being stuck, and then also being able to cultivate joy and practicing gratitude to help us find balance. Something simple as a question I asked, earlier in this presentation, which is what is bringing you joy, right? By recalling what is bringing you joy, you will begin to feel a little bit of joyfulness, right, in your being, I hope. Some people ruminate in negative emotions. Myself, I love to swim in it. I love to wallow in it because when I feel hard, I feel, and I've realized that's not productive for me in order to get work done. And so what I have to do is I have to acknowledge my feelings, feel them, and then kind of figure out how do I now identify that they're there, but then being able to transition to be able to do some work. So some things that you can do would be like, if you're in a stuck position, like in that moment, name 3 good things that have happened or 3 things that are positive that happened to you that morning. And it could be something very, you think common, like my coffee was delicious, right? That seems like, well, but you know what? If you have a good cup of coffee, that's really great, right? Or like my bagel, I didn't burn my bagel, if that's something you always do. So just, it's really important to do that. I often find working with students and even other colleagues, we are so, I don't know, if socialized to be really heady and very like theoretical about emotions, right? Kind of, and not really feeling them. Nobody wants to feel that. And I'm not saying that you should make every one-on-one or a meeting like a cry fest, but I think really encouraging people to tap into what are you feeling right now? Is it like resentment? Is it bitterness, anger, sadness, whatever? It's really important to acknowledge that. There's a great quote by Emily Dickinson that I find a lot of value in, which is anger, what's fed is dead, to starving makes it fat. So thinking about, right, like anger, we often don't want to talk about it. We want to kind of quiet it away, compartmentalize it, but you're actually feeding it. But once you talk about it, right, but once you make it fat, right, but once you talk about it, you sort of end it, right? There's the other analogy about like what wolf do you want to feed, right? Everyone's like comprised of 2 wolves. I'm not sure if people have heard that before, but that's something to think about. And to kind of again, to kind of add some emotions to the process of transition, we have, right, we talked about ending, neutral zone, and new beginning. Here are some feelings that can be attached to that. So in the ending, we have like anger or fear, overwhelmingness, denial, sadness. In the neutral zone, we have confusion, frustration, skepticism, resistance, uncertainty, maybe a little bit of like rebellion, right? And then in the new beginning, you'll feel some energy. There's some sense of accomplishment, enthusiasm, relief, commitment, etc. Emily, you popped up on my thing. I didn't know if you had something to share or.
No, I was just thinking about how, no, continue on. If there's a place for comments later, we'll do that. Yeah.
And feel free, folks, like ask questions in the chat. Emily's monitoring it. If you want to, if you want to direct message her or myself, like please do so. Like this is your presentation. I'm just providing information, but I love to hear from you all. Here's another graph. It's called the W curve. And this can also provide a good visual for folks of like, okay, this is where people are. And this is often used, I think, for first year students, actually. So it was based on a model by Zeller and Mosier. And so this is right, we have the honeymoon phase, cultural shock, initial adjustment, mental isolation, and then acceptance and integration. And I'll just go over really quickly kind of the each phases. So the honeymoon, right, starts before students first arrive on campus. So we're thinking about students, right? They're really excited. They got their letter of acceptance. They're figuring out where they're living. They're going to orientation. It's all that. And so this is the stage where they might experience some nervousness, but overall the feeling is generally one of excitement and positive anticipation. And that could be similar to us, right? Going back in person, going back to working our office. I mean, I've met folks in meetings that they started the day after we went remote. So their entire experience new to CSU has been virtual. So I'm sure those folks are feeling somewhat differently than some of us who've been around for a longer time of like, all right, I'm going back to my office. I started my new position when I was virtual as well. So I've actually not worked in person with my team since I've been in this position. So I'm excited to see how we are in person, to see people in person. So there is some really like eager and nervousness around that. The culture shock is kind of, again, if you think about students, it's like as the newness of college culture wears off, first year students or even students in general begin to deal with the reality of the experiment, adjustments or experimenting. So having to adapt to roommates, sharing a room, trying to make friends, which cafeteria do they go to, who do they eat with, what's the routine, meeting different people from all over with different identities. And that's the same for us, right? As well as going back to an office, like maybe we are familiar or not, and then having to adjust because we're all coming back to, the same space that maybe we worked in before, but we're also coming back different, having been 14 months working remotely. And that's going to show up like you're going to notice that. And that's okay. I think that's a fine thing, right? I think this time has been really good for some introspective work, and you're going to feel the difference from like, oh, you're not Stephanie pre-COVID, like, yeah, I'm not, because it happened to me. And so, it happened and I went through it. So here's how I am. So, then the initial adjustment, it could be, right, as again, for the first year student example, is they successfully manage issues that come their way. So they've overcome some of the cultural shock of like being on campus. They fall into a routine. And that can again be a similar for us as coming back to work. We come and go back into a routine, right? Oh, it's our weekly meeting. Here's my weekly one-on-one with my supervisor. Here's this is the program I'm always a part of. I have to do some reviews, right? Like we can fall into that routine. Then the next part of the W curve is mental isolation. And so this can be, again, this is the time for students when you think about like they're homesick, right? It's now time has elapsed between they last saw family or home or whomever they were familiar with. It's a stretch of time and now they're feeling, right, that feeling of like, I don't belong here, or I'm feeling, I don't like that there's nothing familiar. The new college environment is not as comfortable as home used to be or whatever they're used to. And then also home, thinking about students that go back over the weekends or maybe on a break, it's like that's not the same for them either. And again, I could see similarity for us as well, going back in person. The office space, maybe what we used to, it doesn't feel right, but then going home and working, that also doesn't feel right. Like, so you can kind of feel like you're in this limbo and you just feel stuck. And there's a lot of feelings about, you might feel lack of motivation. I have no drive. Am I burnt out? I think we often toss that term out then, like, oh, you must be burnt out. And I really I find I have trouble with that because it might not just be I'm burnt out. It could be I'm tired. It could be I'm experiencing this. I just don't know. I haven't found my groove yet, right? And so no, I'm not burnt out. I'm just still adjusting to this transition. And then the last part is acceptance and integration and connectedness. So again, with first year students, this might be that they're becoming more involved in campus opportunities. They are creating shared experiences and history with new friends that they've gotten to know, relationships with faculty and staff members. They feel a connection to the campus community. And the same thing, right, for us as going back in person. We begin to fall into that same routine. We have, maybe connected with new staff that joined our office or created relationships, that we couldn't do via Zoom. So these are just some similarities as another way to look at it. So most importantly, during all of this, when you feel your feelings and you are knowing you're going through transition, is you need to be compassionate to yourself. And a way to be self-compassion, to practice self-compassion is mindfulness. So mindfulness is trying to see that your emotions are part of your experience, but it's not all of your experience, right? Try not to over-identify. It's not easy to do so. So when I feel an emotion, typically I might feel like I feel really ashamed or I feel like I'm a bad person. But really my feelings don't make me that person. So another way that I could think about it is what just happened makes me feel sad, right? And I feel sad that I made this person upset. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person, but I realize my action, right? So it's not labeling yourself as whatever the emotion you're feeling. And really letting yourself observe how those stories are causing you to feel. Take the time to really describe in vivid detail what you're telling yourself and what you're feeling physically. Are your shoulders up to your ears? Is your chest tight? Are your fists clenched? What's your face doing? Do you feel hot, right? Do you feel like you're in slow motion? Describe it all. Like those are some ways to really practice mindfulness. And I'm actually going to walk you all through a quick mindfulness check-in. So feel free to, if you want to turn off your camera, you totally can, and just kind of sit back and I'm going to walk us through. Let me pull it up here.
Hey, Stephanie, while you're doing that, there was a really just great addition in the chat
Yeah.
about the flip side being given to frontline folks who have not had any time off or worked remotely and are tired. It's hard for them to hear about. I only worked 4 hours a day for the past 15 months, and that's
Yes.
why I'm in my PJs. I know my staff is already having a hard time with statements like these and trying to meet the needs of those now returning to campus and physical spaces. So it's just a great yeah, perspective to be included as we're thinking about mindfulness and resentments that can come up and different experiences and equity of experience. So
Thank you so much, Nancy, for bringing that up. I really appreciate that. And I think that, right, the same thing of, talking about us returning, people are going to be different, impacted by the pandemic. And so for some, it's been working remotely at home, but for others, it's like, I didn't get to have that. I had to still be here and put myself, in danger at some point, because right, I had to be the front line. And so how do we make sure that we are addressing those things? So thank you so much for bringing that. And yeah, that can certainly build feelings of resentment. And I think it's important to acknowledge that of like, I would feel bitter too. Like I would definitely feel angry. And so, right, how do we together as a staff, like address those emotions? Well, thank you. Okay, so y'all can get comfortable. So before we begin, I want you to find a place to, sit down. If you want to lie down, you certainly can, and adjust your position so that your head is supported by your neck or the floor, however you want to do it. Find a position that enables you to both be relaxed and alert, and with your feet stable on the floor and your arms relaxed in your lap or on your thighs. You're welcome to close your eyes or narrow your gaze to a point in front of you so that you're not really focused on anything. You're just letting your gaze be. Once you feel comfortable, we'll begin by becoming aware of our breathing. Breathe naturally. You don't need to change your breath in any way. Simply bring a gentle and kind attention to your breath. Notice yourself inhaling and exhaling. Notice your breath as it enters and leaves your nostrils, chest area, or belly. Follow the rise and fall of your breath. At times, the mind may wander away from awareness of breathing. If you recognize this, simply acknowledge this and bring your attention back to the breath. We tend to start making our to-do lists or thinking about what's next on our schedule, and that's okay. Just if you do, bring yourself back to your breath. Bring your awareness to your feet. Notice where you feel the contact of your feet on the floor. It could be the back of the heel or the bottom of your foot, sensing into what is being felt. Feeling the heel, ball, and soles of your feet. Now feel into your toes and the tops of your feet. And now the bottoms of your feet. And back into the Achilles tendons and up into your ankles. Now move your awareness up to the lower legs, feeling into the calves and shins. Slowly progressing upward to where your lower legs connect to the knees. Simply notice any sensations or lack of sensations that are present. Let your awareness now rise up to the thighs, sensing into the upper legs and their connection to the hips. Gently withdraw your attention from the hips and lift the awareness to the abdomen and into the belly, the home of digestion, feeling into your stomach with awareness and letting be. Now withdraw your awareness from the belly and move to the tailbone and begin to sense into the lower, middle, and upper parts of the back. Allow any tightness to soften, realizing we hold a lot of stress and tensions in our back and allowing that tension to subside. Again, if you find that your mind is wandering, go ahead and bring your attention back to your breath. Let the awareness now shift into the chest, into the heart and lungs, being present, feeling into the rib cage and sternum. Now gently, let the awareness now shift into the chest, into the heart and lungs, being present, feeling into the rib cage and sternum. I realize I read that again, I'm sorry. Now gently withdraw your attention from the chest and shift the awareness into your fingertips, feeling into the palms and then the backs of your hands and up into your wrists. Proceed up the forearms, elbows, and upper arms, feeling any sensations. Let the awareness move into both shoulders and then up into the neck and throat, being present to any sensations, thoughts, or emotions. Explore your face, your chin, lips, cheeks, nose, eyes, and forehead. And let the awareness move into the top and the back of the head. Notice where your head makes contact with your neck and the ground if you're lying down. Feeling into the ears and then inside of the head. So now you're feeling your whole body as an organism with its various physical sensations, thoughts, and emotions. You might notice the feeling of the air on your clothes or your skin. Keep on breathing and noticing, being present. In a moment, I'm going to ask you, is there a gesture that reminds you to be compassionate to yourself? As you are focusing on your breath, think about what is a gesture you could do to remind you to be compassionate to yourself. So for example, mine is rubbing my arm. I do that when I notice I'm being tough on myself. I rub my arm and it brings me back to compassion. What is your gesture? Breathing in, feel the whole body rising and expanding on an inhalation and falling and contracting on an exhalation. Feel the body as a whole organism being present. As we come to the end of the body scan, congratulate yourself for taking this time to be present. Take a few more breaths. And when you're ready, open your eyes or widen your gaze and come back to the Zoom room. As we come back, I'd love to hear from folks, whether you want to unmute your mic or you want to put in the chat what that was like for you, what are feelings that are rising for you, or if this is practicing calling what it is, feel your feelings.
I like that. What gesture or mental check, like of self-compassion. So for me, I try to interrupt and ask myself if I would talk to someone else the way that I'm talking to myself.
Yeah.
Pamela's appreciating your guidance.
I found it really relaxing and good centering. So definitely stayed with the prompt and enjoyed the experience. So it's really a great exercise and one that I should practice more often. And for me, it's kind of touching my heart. That is my symbol for giving myself some grace. And
thanks for sharing that. And thanks, Pamela. I'd love to guide you this way every morning. Other folks, thoughts that are coming, feelings? Are people asleep? Which is okay if you fell asleep, if your body needed it. How about, did anyone think of a gesture that you would do to remind yourself of self-compassion, or to give yourself self-compassion, excuse me? Okay. Well, as folks put hands on either side of my neck. Ooh, I like that, Donnie. Yeah. Closing my eyes. Closing my eyes and taking a deep breath. Thanks, Eileen. Yeah. And you probably are doing it and you didn't realize that you were doing it for whatever reason. And now you can associate with, this is a reminder for me to be self-compassionate, to give grace to myself, but also to others around me. I find I rub my arm like kind of subconsciously, but in some ways it's my way of like soothing. It's like my self-soothing for myself. Like if someone were to like put their arm around me and do that, like I just do it to myself, right? It's almost like a hug. So there's different reasons for our gestures. So I'm going to keep us moving because I know we don't have much time left, but so the next letter for COVID is observe your habits. So evaluating your habits, too much or too little of anything could interfere with your well-being, right? Moderation is key. And so think about habits in this case that I'm talking about are things we do to avoid feeling. So it could be drinking, it could be overeating, it could be blaming others, it could be shopping, right? Whatever it is you do to numb out. It could be Netflix binging. And some people may equate Netflix, like watching a marathon, as self-care. But I also want to say, like, well, if you're just constantly like engaged, you're not really also reflecting. And so there is some aspects, I think, of numbing out. So notice what you do when you're coping and evaluate, are you doing more than you usually do? And if you are, maybe you can take a break. So for instance, if you're drinking to alleviate stress, which makes sense, like I tell you, cocktail really, helps everything. But maybe notice how much you're drinking, right? If you're drinking more than usual, do you take a break? And I think this really goes well. This applies for supervisees. Sometimes I hear students, man, like, man, I had a rough week and like I went hard this weekend. And okay, you let off steam. One, are you being safe? And two, let's think about also like how often are you doing that? And if there's another way to maybe engage yourself to channel your feelings in a different way. I eat out. I'm an emotional eater. And so I find that I eat out when I'm stressed because it's just easy. And I love me some McDonald's. And I find that my finances get impacted, right? Like you think, oh, I'm just going, whatever, once, twice a day. And then you add up and I'm like, wow, there went some of my paycheck. And so making a small adjustment, it's not to say like, you'll never do it. And this isn't to bring shame, but it's like, how do I make an adjustment to my coping skills, but also in a way that's going to help me financially. And so that could be like, when I go out to eat, I might share an entree with someone rather than, order one for myself, right? Something like that. So observing your habits, what did you do when you were working during the time of COVID, whether in person or not? And, how do you see that maybe transitioning into when you are coming back into the workplace, when everyone's back in the workspace? So those are some things to keep an eye on. The next letter for COVID Connect is vacate. So pressing pause, taking intentional breaks from social media, news exposure, all of it, and making time to reset, reboot, and recharge. This isn't meant to say like, turn on, like, don't be aware of what's going on. Like no news is like great news. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, though, you can fall into doom scrolling or going down the rabbit hole of social media. Like that's me. And so when do you notice like, wow, I've really been on this Reddit chain for the last hour, right? And so are there different ways to maybe help with that? Like I know for the iPhone, you can put timers on different apps so that they automatically like shut off, so you can't access it unless you like take the timer off. How do you manage notifications thoughtfully? I know for some folks, like after 5, they might turn off some notifications so they're not constantly, checking to see the red dot there, unless you're on call, right? Like don't shirk your duties, right? But if you don't have to respond until the next day, how do you do that? How do you create some boundaries? Vacating also is an act of self-kindness and another self-compassion. So it can look in various ways, right? It could be deleting an app that maybe isn't being productive for you, or muting a group chat, saying no to another commitment, right? Spending less time in toxic environments. We want to practice self-kindness. We are so quick to provide kindness to others, but we are terrible at applying it to ourselves. And so right, self-compassion in this in society, we often are told like ignore your pain and just go with things with a stiff upper lip. But how do you change that and to say, you know what, this is really difficult right now and it sucks, and I know I will get through it, but it sucks right now. It's the same thing as going through things with a stiff upper lip. If anything, it's better because now you've acknowledged your feelings. And like it's crappy right now, but it's gonna, you'll get through this because you have before. Or if you're finding it's difficult to get through, what are some like next steps you can do? How can I comfort and care for myself in this moment? Right. And I think what Emily said, go back to that, is how would I talk to someone else? And why would I not talk to myself that way? Right. Here's another great acronym for vacate is before you do anything, speak, read, consume, repost, think about it. So is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind? An example of this could be when I read an article And maybe it's talking about, say, like Black Lives Matter. Oh, and there's comments at the end of the article. I don't read those because I know there's going to be a nasty comment on there, or comment I don't agree with, I should say. And even though it'll be one out of like many, I will fixate on that comment and it will just make me feel a type of way. I don't need to do that. It's right. I read the article for information. I don't need to read more from the comments. Right. So that's an example there. Are you reposting something to provide information, or are you, right? So I know a lot of times people were posting things to be educational or informational for others, but what harm are we causing to other people, right? Oh, are we re-triggering trauma for other folks? Those are things to think about. We often unplug things or reset things to make them work. And after unplugging for a few minutes, it does work. So make sure that you also are unplugging yourself for a few minutes, right? Because we need that reset. The I in COVID stands for identifying your self-care needs. So I don't know about you all, but I didn't really hear about self-care until I was in grad school. And then I was like, what the hell is self-care? Like, we say it a lot, we know that's a buzzword. I'm the corneral being, so I say self-care. But to me, self-care it's very different for everybody. And it can be something as like simple as like getting sleep. It says good night's sleep, but getting sleep, or stretching, or it says healthy dinner. And when we say healthy, I think about foods that give you an emotional boost, or healthy meals can be what you want. We have a dietitian right in the health center, but also for students on campus, there's a dietitian there. So is it something you want to provide more energy? You need more iron, etc. It could be also a meal you want to create, right? Healthy doesn't have to be like no fast food, because I think your body needs energy and fuel, and sugar and fat are some of those things. So, right. Or all three. So when I feel out of funk, and this happened to me yesterday, true story. I just flown back from coming off a vacation, and I was just feeling all types of things. And so I asked myself actually these questions, and I realized I had to say no to a lot of them. So it was like, are you hydrated? No. Have I eaten something in the last 3 to 6 hours? The answer was no. So I already knew right there that was contributing to my irritability and my feeling of like despair and sadness. So ask yourself your questions, like, have you drank some water? Again, nutritious means like, what is, feeling your body? What, are you eating foods mindfully, right? Like, are you mindlessly eating in front of your computer, or are you actually taking the time to savor your soup or whatever you're eating? It can also be eating really dense food, like lots of greens or fruits or whatever, right? I want to be clear about nutritious and not to make it seem like that is the only way, because a Twinkie is also nutritious. Thank you. Have you stretched or moved your body lately? Did you sleep? And it says 7 to 8 hours. Some people, I operate off 6, right? It's different. Have you had a shower? Have you said something nice or done something for someone else? Acts of gratitude actually is known to, when you do an act of gratitude for someone, it actually does also make you feel great as well. So what are some things that you're doing nice? And it could be a simple text to people like, I'm thinking about you, Venmoing $5 to someone, hey, have a coffee on me, etc. What have you made time to do things you enjoy? So that question of what's bringing you joy. I love when people are like, I'm enjoying my garden, my family's in town, I'm about to go on vacation and spend some intentional time. And then lastly, when's the last time you spent time in nature? And I don't mean like, when's the last time you summited a 14er? Like, that is not my time in nature, but like, when's the last time you went outside and took a breath of fresh air, or walked around, sat in the shade? It's hot, like don't stay in the sun, that kind of thing, right? Change of environment. So these are very simple things to contribute to self-care. Self-care isn't an escape from your life. It should be something, right, that we add to it to supplement and complement it. So think about that, right? Self-care is not something to escape, but rather we are adding to our life. I remember when I heard that, I was like, that is something really like deep here. Self-care is giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you, right? We know that you can't pour from an empty cup. I like the analogy of, for flying on an airplane, oxygen masks will drop from the ceiling if the pressure drops. And they always say to put your own oxygen mask on before you help others, because you are no help if you pass out, right? So put yours on, then you can help others. And so I think about, is my oxygen mask on right now as I'm helping others? No. Okay, I need to do that first. The last D is do it. So doing it aligned with your values and priorities. So focusing on priorities and what you're valuing and what you're doing something towards them every day. So thinking about, I think like greater purpose, and that seems very like heady. When I give this presentation to students, we talk about, what is your priority? And being a student is to graduate, right? And that can be that can seem very lofty in the sense of like, if they're a first year, right, it's like, I got 4 more years or 5 more years or whatever, what are your goals? But how do we say like, okay, that may be the ultimate goal or whatever, that's the bigger goal. Then what are some little goals do we create along the way to get there? We refer to the Career Center or you at CSU because there's great resources and goal setting. But I also talk about like, what is the sense of purpose in your life? So like reconnecting with like your religious or spiritual faith. So we can make ourselves feel better by focusing on the aspects of our lives that give us meaning. So for instance, if someone is a religious person, connecting with people who share your faith. If you're a spiritual person, reaching out to others who share your spiritual values and practices. Focusing on the greater purpose of meaning in life can give you a sense of optimism. And so that's why, people feel better when they're helping. And right, how do you manage like helping too much or you're not helping yourself, right? Others can find solace through gratitude journaling. So starting or ending the day by writing down something for which you're grateful, focusing on and meaning and gratitude can help you move past like difficult times. So that's what we mean by do it, right? It's not just like, what is your end all be all? Because that's hard, when someone ever asks like, what's your 5-year plan? I'm like, ugh, right? But for me, it's like, well, my greater meaning in life is like, I want to have an positive impact in whatever action I do. And here are the ways I can do it. And so reminding yourself that and helping. And if you find you're like, I'm not fulfilling that, how do you maybe reconnect yourself to that? All right, getting to the resources. The last part of COVID Connect is the connect. It's important to connect to others and connecting yourself to resources and others to resources. We are wired for connection. We cannot go through transition. We could not have gone through the pandemic alone. Even the most introverted or anti-person, someone has a person, right? So we need to make sure we're having connection with others. So checking in with yourself, but also with others in ways that are comfortable for them. So there might be some folks who are not comfortable being back hanging out in person, and that's okay. How do you find ways to do that distant wise, right? And I think we've proven that with Zoom and Teams, et cetera. And spending time on your own can do great things for others and being kind to one another. What's your sphere support, right? Are they helpful, et cetera? So the resourcing equals strength. So help is out there. Visit you at CSU. So we have a you at CSU. We soon will have one for faculty and staff, but I often go to the student one anyway. And I don't know how many of you all have ever visited you at CSU. We tell students to do so. It's amazing. It's essentially Google for CSU resources. We have over, there's a bunch from like, all over, but then there's a bunch for CSU. So anything you want on there, you Google it, you can find it. I looked up mindfulness videos and there were 10 of them listed and they're amazing. They are just this great background noise and you follow this little like water dripping. It's awesome. So just that's something to share out there. Ways to provide empathy to support your staff, each other is listening and offering a supportive ear, making sure you center the person's needs in the conversation. I have a thing where I like to relate in so people feel that they're not alone, but sometimes relating in on my part can deter the conversation. And so how do you just make sure, like if I'm talking to, let's say, Emily, I'm making sure I'm listening to her. Encouraging help-seeking behavior, such as accessing mental health care or resources, and then also modeling active discussions of coping and problem solving. So how are you modeling for this person what you do when you are having a difficult time, right? Again, that's a part of like the rapport building, the relating in. And if you have concerns with someone, we do have a really great tool of Tell Someone, where you can report someone that you may be concerned about and you're not sure how to quite address that. We have quite a few digital tools. One right now is SilverCloud, and it's available for staff and faculty. It's an awesome digital platform that focuses on cognitive behavioral therapy. Unfortunately, staff and faculty cannot get a coach, but students can because their fees pay for the service. And so I'm a coach for students, and we will never meet face to face. It's just an exchange of weekly messages, but it's a great way for students to work on a program that's designed for, say, anxiety or depression or body image, and have a coach to hold them accountable, check in, support. It's non-judgmental. So if they don't log in one week, we don't punish them. We just, we ask, like, what's going on? Do you need some extra support? The faculty and staff have the same access to the resources. And I, as a coach, I had to go through the modules. I really recommend them. They're really awesome, well-informed, kind of give you some, you might already know some things, but they give you some other stuff to think about. You certainly can find it by going to our website at thehealthcollegestate.edu and finding SilverCloud. But students, that's how students can find it. They can find it via you at CSU. They also may get an email invitation from the counseling center or student case management. Students can now opt in, though, to get a coach. Before, they had to have an invitation, but now some of our modules allow students to just click, I want a coach. And it's pretty awesome when you've coached someone for a while. I had a PhD student I coached for, I would say, probably about 5 months, and we just finally finished our time together. But to see that person from the beginning to the end, just how much that they've gained from it, it's pretty rewarding. And I would say that it works. Another thing that we offer for students, but I downloaded it again myself, it's an app called Nod. It's a loneliness app, and it's partnered with Grit, which also brought in you at CSU. And Nod really focuses on destroying the myth of magical friendship. So it focuses on giving ideas for students and how to build connection. It has reflection, so exercises for students to think about what went well in their interaction, what didn't, and based on the responses, it will take them into a totally new reflection pathway. And there's also real life testimonials for students to read and see other people using it, right? And so it's a really great tool. It's free. I really encourage you all to check it out, encourage your students to download it. It's, like I said, it's free. And then counseling is available. It's available right now for students and for staff and faculty. If you don't know, we have counseling services also available through EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. I really recommend, as someone who has utilized those resources, can be hard to navigate. However, we have a wonderful person that works there. And there's, I think if you go to the website, they have a contact. I would definitely utilize it. And I know it's been very helpful for some of my colleagues who had very specific needs of wanting to be connected with counselors that matched identities with them, or if they were looking for specific folks who had issues. But again, for your students, counseling is available. Our counselors are now back in person at the health center. We also have a multicultural counseling services webpage on our health network website. So it's specific. It's where everything's in place. I don't know about you all, but I find it hard to navigate when I have to look through so many things. But now we have a specific webpage for our students with marginalized identities. And it has a list of drop-in hours, identity-based group counseling, who the multicultural counseling team is, etc. So it's all in one spot. So just want to reiterate our COVID Connect acronym to help you all with transition in our upcoming fall or upcoming academic year. But COVID Connect, calling it what it is, observing your habits, vacate, press pause, identify your self-care needs, do it in alignment with your values, and connecting to others and resources. And I want to leave you with, if you all wouldn't mind taking a picture to provide us feedback. It's how we do better. And this presentation actually came from feedback about there was a need for this presentation. And so we created it for all of last academic year, but I'd really appreciate if folks could certainly provide that. But yes, any questions? That's the end of my presentation for you all.
Stephanie, thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording and encourage folks to also click the attendance link. So feedback for Stephanie and the attendance link for us, please. I was so enamored with what you were sharing. I forgot to put it in a couple minutes ago. So I think most of folks are still with us, but I'm going to have that weird Siri thing.